In today's Just the Tip segment, to kind of keep with the travel theme, this was something that we did on this Fort Lauderdale trip that we took a couple of years ago. We rented a car, and the car that we rented was actually the same car that we drive at home. And the reason that we did that is, number one, you're familiar with it. You know what you're doing. You can sit in. You know how to fix the seat and the mirrors and all that. You know where the buttons are on the radio and how to turn the car on and all that. But more importantly, our daughter's in a car seat, so it made installing the car seat that much easier because you already know what you're doing. And for whatever reason, for me, my wife hates when I do this, but when we have to put the car seat in together, I just short circuit. Like my brain just goes dead and I have no idea what I'm doing for whatever reason. Installing a car seat is not that hard, although it can be frustrating, but I just go completely brain dead. So having the same car that we had maybe was a good help in my direction, but I think it's a smart thing. So if you're traveling and you have to rent a car, if it's within your budget, try to look for the car that you already have, and it makes it that much easier because you know how to pack the car with your suitcases, you know where everybody sits, you know where everything goes, and you know how to install that car seat. In today's Just the Tip, it's going to be a quick down and dirty on watch sizing. Now this is for guys since I'm a guy, but just a couple of quick tips on how to size a watch when you're looking for one, just kind of a few things to consider. The first thing that you're going to want to consider is you're going to want to measure your wrist circumference. Now, the average wrist circumference for guys is anywhere between 6 and 7.5 inches. Go ahead, put your joke in. I'll wait. Okay, that was pretty funny. The next thing is you're going to want to pay attention to your wristband. And more wider is going to be more casual. Narrower is going to be more formal. Typically, you want to find a balance in between. You don't want it so thin that it looks like a bracelet or so thick that it looks like you're wearing a belt. The next little tip is going to be to pay attention to the watch face and casing, right? So that's this part here, the face and the casing. You're going to want to determine the width and the thickness. Again, bigger is typically going to be more casual. Smaller is going to be more formal to a point. You don't want to have it so big that it looks like a Flavor Flav clock on your wrist, but you don't want it so small that it almost looks like it belongs on your wife's wrist. And finally, a little extra tip is going to be the materials of your watch band. So typically when you think about materials like this that are rubber or plastic or other synthetics, those are usually going to be more on the casual side, where metals like aluminum and stainless and gold and stuff like that are going to be more on the formal side. So you're going to want to balance all of that. What I would recommend doing if you are looking for a watch is go to a jewelry store where you can see a wide variety of watches and try a few on just to see the type of watches. There's so much information and I am not an expert at all. I like watches, but I'm not an expert. But what I would say is you can't go wrong with a nice semi-formal watch that can look good with a suit or look good with a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. One that I've had for years is an Omega Seamaster. I got it way back when for my 21st birthday. That's a great watch to have. Not cheap, but that goes with absolutely anything. So that's an example of that. And then you can have a watch like an Apple Watch with different casing or something like that and different bands to make it formal or casual or whatever. So watch sizing. Today's Just the Tip. Now it's time for today's Just the Tip segment. And for today's Just the Tip, it's going to be food related because we were just talking about food stuff and culinary and blah, blah, blah. So this tip is going to be for moments where you would like to maybe add more of a saltier punch to your food or more of a peppery punch to your food. Instead of just adding salt or pepper, think about foods that have similar flavor profiles. So perhaps if you're making a salad, let's take this as an example. If you would like it to have a little bit more of a salty flavor to it, instead of just adding more salt, which you should add salt to a salad, what about adding something like capers or olives? That's going to give you a little bit of saltiness, but it's also going to give you some tang, some texture, some chew, some different color. So that is an example of how you can add something salty to a food instead of just adding more salt. And on the flip side, if you're looking for something a little more peppery, if we're keeping with the salad theme, one of the best little peppery kind of foods out there is arugula. So if you're having a salad and you were going to have just romaine lettuce and a couple cherry tomatoes and drizzle some vinaigrette on top of it, well, what if you had some arugula and maybe some spinach or some watercress and you threw in some olives or capers and then you added in some citrus, which we'll talk about later. and then you maybe threw in some crunchy element like a granola or like some almonds or pistachio, something like that. And then you add in some cheese, maybe like a feta, which is also salty, something like that. Now you've completely elevated what you were eating, and you didn't have to do anything too crazy or do anything too chefy. You're just incorporating other ingredients that can add more depth to your dish as opposed to just adding more salt or just adding more pepper. So that's today's Just the Tip. In today's Just the Tip segment, we're going to talk about something that I am not an expert in at all. I can't even say the word half the time, but I'm going to try it. We're going to talk about, very briefly, a re-amortization, yes, of your mortgage. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is my wife and I just went through this a few months ago, and a re-amortization, see, I can't even say it, to re-amortize your loan, there you go, F-U, 9-syllable word, or to recast your loan or your mortgage is basically you take a lump sum, a large lump sum, and you apply it towards your principal that you have on your mortgage, and you basically reset it. The terms stay the same, so if it's a 30-year, it's still a 30-year. Your interest rates stay the same, so if it's 6% or 7%, it stays at 6 or 7%, which sucks. But you're able to lower the total amount, which in essence lowers the monthly payment that you will be making. And then also over the life of the loan, assuming that we're staying with it for the life of the loan, will reduce your overall cost because you're paying less in interest over time. Now, it's not applicable for everyone. It's different than refinancing. Refinancing your loan or your mortgage is when you actually change the terms. So either the length or the rate. This is re-amortizing or recasting your mortgage, which is you're just trying to lower your monthly payment in essence by applying a large lump sum to the principal. So you're lowering that principal, but the terms, the time, and the interest rate stay the same. So it's not for everyone, but if you're in a situation where that is something you might be able to do, especially if, depending on what your interest rate is, that's something I would say you might want to consider. Again, that's different than refinancing. This is a recast or a re-amortization of your mortgage. Yes, I said it. Today's Just the Tip. In today's Just the Tip segment, we're going to talk back about the speakers that we were in the sponsor I wish I had, the JBL Charge 5. But this really applies to any kind of speaker setup. So my Just the Tip here is if you're looking to create plenty of sound in a larger space, maybe a patio or a backyard, maybe a large living room or something like that, instead of trying to buy the biggest speaker you can and crank it to 11, my advice would be to buy multiple speakers that you can daisy chain or connect together and space them throughout the space and creating more points of sound being able to be heard. And when you do that, your overall total volume that you have to turn the speaker up to is going to be far lower because you'll have more speakers. Now, again, I understand that there's cost associated with that. I'm not telling everybody to run out and go drop $1,000 on speakers. But if you have a backyard or a courtyard or a patio or a large living room or something like that, and you're trying to create a space where you can have music being kind of heard in the background, but it's not, that one giant speaker that at every college, frat house where it's just cranking from the corner, then your way to do that is to buy speakers that can daisy chain together, buy multiple, space them appropriately in the room. And a bonus Just the Tip, a little extra tip, if you will, is going to be to buy front-facing speakers. And I'm not a big fan of the speakers that you set that have a 360-degree sound. That's cool if you set it in the middle of a room, but how often do you have space or a table or something to literally set it in the middle of the room and then all the people are around it? Or if you're outside in a patio or a backyard or a pool, you're probably not going to put the speaker directly in the middle of the patio or backyard or pool and have the sound go outward. So I recommend buying front-facing speakers that project the sound in one direction, and then you can angle that and position the speakers in such a way that you're getting the sound from multiple directions, and now it's surround sound, but you also don't have to crank the volume. So that is my Just the Tip and bonus little extra tip for today. All right, for today's Just the Tip, it's almost kind of more of a visual segment. So I'm going to throw something on Instagram or make a little video on the YouTube page. The Instagram is @SaturdayIsDatterday Media, and so is the YouTube page at Saturday is Datterday Media. So check those out sometime this week. If you are enjoying what we're talking about here, what I'm talking about, then consider following the podcast and consider following the Instagram account. I try to throw stuff up there every day or so. I do have a regular job, so try to do this just intermittently when I can, at night, on weekends, that kind of thing. But check that out. Check out the YouTube page. We're going to have a lot more videos. Today's just the tip is I'm going to talk about how to more properly season a steak. And there's a million videos out there, and I just want to touch on a couple of things. So I used to cook professionally, and one of the positions I was a lead broiler cook for over a year at one of the places that I worked at, which means I worked on this giant slide broiler that you pull out the shelf that's basically a grill, and you can throw 50, 75 steaks on it. You push it back in, and the heat is from up above, and it's crazy hot. It would get to be like 1,100 degrees, and I mean, I would lose 4 or 5 pounds every night cooking on that thing just from sweating it off because it was so hot. But one of the things that I learned from that is when you're seasoning a steak, kosher salt is what I prefer. Some people use sea salt, but the reason I like kosher salt is it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit flakier, it's a little bit easier to kind of pick up and pinch in your finger and kind of see the spread that you're getting when you're sprinkling the salt on there. So I prefer to use kosher salt. And then what I like to do is I do not like to use pepper. And I know that that's contradictory for a lot, but the reason why is because salt is a seasoning and pepper is a spice, which means pepper can burn if you're using a cast iron pan or if your grill is super hot or whatever. So I think all you need is really good salt. So the way that I would suggest seasoning the steak is, first of all, you need to be getting a ribeye or a New York strip, 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick. That's where you want to be. I don't like fillets, and you've probably heard this before because there's not a lot of fat inside intertwined in the muscle. So what ends up happening, you get a very tender steak, but you don't have nearly as much flavor as you could, and it's not nearly as forgiving because there's not a lot of extra fat in there that kind of melts and turns into that umami texture and kind of makes it feel a little extra buttery. So I like ribeye, I like New York strip. I prefer bone off. It's going to save you some money, and I just prefer to not have the bone on there. I think it's just a cleaner cook, and you get a more even cook all the way around. So that's the first two parts. Salt, and then get yourself a 2 or 2.5 inch thick New York strip or ribeye. I know that seems pretty thick. That's what you want. And the second part is, if you're going to be sharing it with someone and you have one of those steaks and they're pretty thick, before you start cooking, cut it in half. Now you have 2 separate steaks from raw. You can cook them at 2 different temperatures. You can season them different, however you want. That's what I recommend. And the second step, let it come up to room temperature for about 30, 45 minutes. Let it sit out there. You don't have to do this. There's a lot of steakhouses that just keep their steaks in the refrigerator. They open up the door and they season their steak and throw it right on the grill. So, and those are great steaks. So you don't have to do this, but if you have the time at home, that's what I would suggest. So pull it out, let it sit for 30, 45 minutes. And then I like to use oil to coat the steak to moisten it so you have something for the salt to stick to. Some people will say grapeseed or avocado oil. I just use olive oil. The one potential disadvantage with that is olive oil has a lower smoke point, which means it can burn faster, but I'm not drenching it in this. I'm just sort of lightly basting it or kind of rubbing it in my hands with olive oil just to coat it lightly. So usually it's never a problem for me. And then what I do is I hit it with a lot of kosher salt, more than you would think. And again, I don't use pepper because I just prefer salt on the steak, but you can, everybody and their mother uses salt and pepper and they don't deal with burns and all that. An important distinction, salt is a seasoning, pepper is a spice, and spices can burn under high heat. So what I prefer to do is just use salt, kosher salt, and you're almost going to want to over salt it because when you throw it on a grill, even if you follow the tried and true method of not poking and prodding it and flipping it every 5 seconds, you're still going to lose a lot of that salt that's just going to fall off from being on the grill. So that olive oil is going to kind of act like a glue that's going to hold that salt. And then over salt the hell out of your steak within reason, but really give it a good dose of salt on both sides, the front side, the back side, and all the edges as well. And then let that rest a couple of minutes and then toss it on the grill. What I prefer to do is have a hot grill, so medium high heat. Some people like to just crank up the grill as much as possible and they think that's cool or you're being a badass, but grilling food, whatever it is, it's about controlling the heat, and really cooking anything for that matter. It's about controlling the heat. So steak can handle high heat, something like a medium high or high. That doesn't mean that you can just walk away and forget about it. So I like to go medium high heat on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 7, 7.5, 8. And then I throw it down. I like my steaks rare to medium rare. Rare is a temperature, so there is a temperature range for that. So raw is not a temperature. Rare is a temperature. So I like between rare and medium rare, especially if you're dealing with a ribeye or a New York strip. Anything more than that, and you might as well throw it in the garbage, in my opinion. So that's what I like to do. Pull it off, let it rest 10 to 12 minutes. I know that may seem weird because your steak's going to get cold. It might seem like it's cooling off a little bit, but what you can do is before you cut it, just flash it real fast back on the grill for 5 or 10 seconds just to get it warm again on the outside. But you're going to want to let it rest so the juices kind of come back together. Everything gets all frazzled when it cooks, and you want it to come back together and sit back inside itself. And then when you cut it, the juices stay within the meat. They don't run all over your cutting board, all over your plate. And you can add fresh herbs. You can hit it with butter at the end. You can do any of that kind of stuff. The last thing that I do, if you do want to add your pepper, is after you slice it, if you're going to slice it kind of, like you see on Instagram or whatever, then hit it with a little bit more salt and then crack some fresh black pepper on top of it, and Bob's your uncle. So there you go. So that is today's extended Just the Tip. Hey-o. All right, and now it's time for today's Just the Tip. And this is another food-related Just the Tip. And today I'm going to talk about something that's kind of related in theory to what I talked about a few weeks ago, which is, hey, if you wanted to salt your food or pepper your food or add those salt or peppery notes to whatever you're cooking, you can incorporate not just salt and pepper, but you can incorporate foods that have saltier notes like olives or pepperier notes like arugula. So for this Just the Tip, I'm talking about when you are making smoothies, which is something I love to do, and I'll throw a YouTube video up at some point on the smoothie that I make all the time. A lot of people do this one thing and it drives me nuts. They put ice in their smoothie. Now that seems totally logical. And if you have a chain location like a Smoothie King or something like that, they've got standardized recipes, so they account for how much ice is going in when they blend or whatever. I'm not talking about that. But if you're making a smoothie at home, or even if you're a small restaurant or whatever and you're making smoothies, putting ice in your smoothie does two things. You think it freezes it, but it actually makes it more of a slushy. And then you think it adds volume, and it does, but it also dilutes what you're doing because you're adding ice, which last time I checked is frozen water. So what I recommend is, instead of using ice, similar to what I mentioned about the salty foods and the peppery foods, is instead of using ice, use foods that are frozen, like frozen blueberries or frozen bananas or frozen strawberries, something like that, frozen spinach. Use frozen foods to help make the smoothie frozen. And then for your emulsifier, to make it nice and blend and have a nice creamy texture and mouthfeel to it, think about stuff like using an avocado or even some peanut butter. And a lot of people will put peanut butter in, but if you have a nut allergy, and also peanut butter tastes like peanut butter, avocado has a very, very mild taste. So you grab some fresh avocado, use like a fourth of an avocado if it's like a normal size, not one of those giant ones the size of this microphone. But if it's a normal size avocado, cut it in 4, use about a fourth of the avocado, and have that in there with frozen blueberries, which is the smoothie I make, avocado, frozen blueberries, some protein powder, and some almond milk, and you end up getting a really, really nice cold smoothie that has a great texture all the way through. It's super smooth and creamy and velvety, as opposed to if you throw a bunch of ice in there, the smoothie's going to get cold, it's going to be frozen or more like a smoothie, but it's just extra water. It's going to dilute the taste of the other stuff you put in there, and it's not emulsified, so it'll start to separate. So I say skip the ice, add frozen foods in small pieces when you're putting it in a blender, and then for your emulsifier, you can add something like peanut butter. I prefer adding avocado because it's a much milder taste. Prepare to be amazed. Today's Just the Tip. All right, in today's Just the Tip segment, I have a culinary tip for you that served me well when I used to cook professionally and served me well after I was done and hung up the apron. As we get into the holiday season, especially real close to Thanksgiving, but Even if it's too late to use this tip for Thanksgiving, you can use it upcoming for Christmas or New Year's or whatever the holidays that you're celebrating. So the idea is everybody gets up Thanksgiving Day super early, right? And they get the turkey on and they get the grill fired up and the oven is on and you're just in the kitchen all day long, just cranking out food all day long. Typically, it's not food that everybody loves, or not food that everybody loves as much as something maybe like pizza or steak or tacos or nachos or whatever. So you're slaving away all day long with food that isn't necessarily anybody's absolute favorite, but you're doing it because it's Thanksgiving. So my Just the Tip segment here is to do all of that prep, or as much as possible, in the weeks or even a month leading up to the day. So all you have to do on the day before is warm stuff up. Now, there's a few things that you're going to have to cook from scratch, but a lot of stuff will hold really, really well. And one of the things that I did as a practical example is I took, instead of turkey, I cooked turkey breasts, big turkey breasts, like 2 of them, and I cooked them a couple of weeks beforehand. So I had plenty of time to brine them overnight and cook them perfectly, let them cool down. I did all of that. Sliced them up perfectly, and then I vacuum sealed them. And even if you can't do that, you can just Ziploc them, and I froze them. And then the night before, or 2 days before, I pulled them out of the freezer. I let them come up to refrigerated in the refrigerator. And then all I had to do was warm them up. And I used to warm them up in the oven. Also, I hit them with some of the gravy that I made several weeks ago and also froze. You can do this sometimes with vegetables like roasted potatoes or whatever. And I understand people want to go crazy and show off for the holidays and cook as much as possible. That's great. I'm just saying, if there's a handful of things or even one thing you can do days or weeks before, and that's one less hour you have to spend in the kitchen, I think that's a huge win, because the whole purpose of you being with Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever and having family and friends, you're supposed to be part of the gathering. You're not supposed to be the one catering the gathering. So if you've got to do some of that cooking, try getting ahead of it by a couple of days or a couple of weeks. All you got to do is warm stuff up. That is today's Just the Tip. All right, now it's time for this week's Just the Tip segment. And for this week's Just the Tip segment, I'm going to talk about wine briefly. And I want to throw all the disclaimers out there on the front end. I am not a wine expert. I am not a wine aficionado. I am simply someone who enjoys wine. Like Michael Scott from The Office, when he swirls around a white and smells it and says, "This is a nice white wine." So I'm slightly above that, but that's about it. But one of the things I did learn when my wife and I were fortunate enough to go to Napa, and then I also learned this from when I cooked in restaurants and talked to the sommeliers that we had on staff who were actually wine experts, was oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, if you can find a wine that is made from a single vineyard, you are often going to find that the winemakers are able to give those grapes a little bit more TLC, a little bit more care, and they're able to have a little bit more control over the growth and the quality and the time to select and the whole process. So if you are in a wine store, I would highly recommend taking a look or asking whoever is there if they can point you to any wines, whatever varietal you like, if it's Pinot or Cab or Merlot, but don't tell anybody on Sideways movie to drink Merlot. But any wine that you like, is see if you can ask, hey, do you have anything from a single vineyard? And two of my favorites are Hyde and Barnett. And Barnett I am partial to simply because I was able to go to that vineyard. It is way up in the mountains in, I believe, St. Helena near Napa. And we were actually there and got to sit on like this little table area that just overlooked right into the valley of Napa Valley. And as we were up there, it was really sunny out and it was warm and we had our jackets off. And then all of a sudden, all these clouds rolled in, and they rolled in to the point where like we could barely see each other across the table. It was like the craziest thing that I had ever seen in my life. You could not see down into the valley anymore. We threw our jackets back on. It was really cold. And then 20, 30 minutes later, it kind of passed through and you could see each other easily again and see back down into the valley again. That was always a really neat experience. So my recommendation, again, with all the disclaimers that I am not a sommelier or an aficionado or an expert or anything like that, is sometimes, not always, but sometimes, if you look for a single vineyard wine, you can often find a little bit higher quality and a little bit more well-rounded and balanced wine, because those winemakers are able to give those grapes and the whole process a little extra TLC. So that is this week's Just the Tip. All right, in this week's Just the Tip, I am going to give you a cooking tip that should help you around the holidays or even as the months are colder and you just want to do something fun in the kitchen. So this week's Just the Tip is going to be about if you would like to make some version of your own fruit, jam, jelly, compote, whatever you want to call it in a very loose, broad culinary term. I know all those specifically are different things, but just for the average home cook, this is what I would suggest you do. Pick your favorite fruit or berry. So it's wintertime, so maybe something like apples would be really good. I love doing this with strawberries. You could do it with cranberries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, whatever you want. You're going to take a set amount of that. So whatever it is, whether it's a pound or 2 pounds or whatever. And the more precise you can be on weighing this with a scale, the better it's going to be. So if you have a scale that can do this in grams, or the more specific the number can be on a scale, the better is going to be for this. So let's say you take 100 grams, which is a small amount, but just for easy math, you take 100 grams of a fruit. You're going to take 30% of that weight and add that amount of sugar to it. So if you have 100 grams, 30% of 100 is 30. So you're going to take 30 grams of sugar. So you have 100 grams of fruit, 30 grams of sugar, and you put that on a stove with some salt, and you're going to probably need to add a little acid like lemon juice or maybe some apple cider vinegar if you're doing apples, something like that. And you're going to cook that and simmer that down, stirring enough so the sugar doesn't burn. And what you're going to end up seeing is that's going to turn into just the most delicious fruit yumminess that you've ever had. And if you want, you can jar it for later to preserve it. You can freeze it. You can just gobble it up, do whatever you want. But that will go great on toast in the morning. It will go great on ice cream in the evening. It will go great with a spoon right in your pie hole, whatever you want. So that is a very simple thing. It's a kind of a rough, back of the napkin recipe, but take your fruit and then take 30% of that weight in sugar, put the two together, add some acid, add some salt, stir, heat on, medium, low heat, until it cooks down to be the consistency that you want. And it's going to be a really simple, amazing thing. The only bonus, just the tip I would give you, is sugar and fruit, when it's hot like that, turns into lava. So be very careful not to get any on your skin. If you have kids around in the kitchen and they're going to help you, be very, very careful so nobody has any severe burns, or you don't want stuff splattering, God forbid, something like that gets in your eye or anything like that. So just be very careful with that. But no need to be scared. Just be mindful of that. So that is this week's Just the Tip. All right. In this week's Just the Tip segment, it's another food Just the Tip. And it's a super simple one, but it has served me well over the years, especially with a young daughter. One of the things I didn't know I loved until I had a daughter was pancakes. And I like pancakes fine or whatever, but a lot of times they're not super flavorful. And I, as a shocker, don't particularly love the taste of butter. Now, I don't mind it if it's in a sauce, if it's part of a tomato sauce, or maybe if you put a little warm butter on top of a steak or whatever. But by and large, if I had a choice, I would always reach for olive oil. Instead of, if you're at a dinner table and there's bread that comes to the table and butter, or bread that comes to the table with the oil and vinegar mixture, I'm always going to want the oil and vinegar mixture. But I digress. So pancakes. I never really loved pancakes because they were usually drowned in butter or syrup, and they were just kind of ho-hum. So once my daughter got old enough to start eating solid foods and having fun, with food, we started making pancakes together. And the brand of pancakes that we usually just make to make it super simple is a Kodiak. And I've had that as a sponsor. I wish I had last season. They are great. Kodiak does a ton of like kind of protein focused products, oatmeal, pancake mix, make at home like oatmeal and protein bars, kind of like Bear Bites, which are like crackers. Really, really good stuff. Awesome stuff. But we get this, their pancake mix, their chocolate chip pancake mix. And it's just delicious, but this applies to kind of any pancake mix. Is when you mix it and you mix it with the water and you get it to be the consistency that you want, then let it rest for about 5 minutes before you put it in the pan. So what I'll typically do is mix it up and then let it rest, turn the flame on low, get my pan on, warm. And once that's good and heated, then I'll add my oil spray or oil to the pan or butter to the pan to coat the pan. And then I'll put my pancake mix in, but I let it sit 3 to 5 minutes, maybe even 7 minutes. And the reason why is that baking powder, everything else that's in the pancakes, letting that rise get fluffy because you just whisk the hell out of it. So letting the air get all in there, letting all that happen when you then put the batter into the pan and are gentle with it and don't keep slapping it with a spatula and just turn it once if you can. You're going to find yourself that you have a really thick and super, super fluffy pancake, like exponentially more fluffy than you've had, or exponentially fluffier than you've had before. So that is this week's Just the Tip.